Welcome to my off-grid adventures. I'm Frank, this is my puppy Pumpkin, and we're glad that you're here with us today because we're going to go through how we designed and built these custom bunk beds. These bunk beds are cheaper than we could buy in the store, stronger than we could buy, and they really were quite easy to put together. One of the main reasons we added this cabin to our off-grid property this year was to enable us to share our beautiful 60-acre paradise with guests. We wanted to provide them with a comfortable place to stay. So we ordered this custom-built cabin to fit 2 bunk beds so we could have 4 guests stay at a time. But when we started looking for new and then used bunk beds online, everything we found was either expensive, flimsy, or designed for kids. So after watching a bunch of YouTube DIY bunk bed videos, I combined the features that I liked best and designed my own. This adult-size bunk bed cost less than $150 in lumber. It took less than a day to build, and it's strong enough that I can climb onto the top bunk without a second thought. In this video, I'll show you exactly how I built it, what it cost, the tools I used, and the design decisions that make it incredibly strong. And if you want to build one for yourself, I've put the complete materials list and cut list in the description. Before we jump into the build, here's how everything turned out. One of the things I like most is that both beds are comfortable for adults. There's plenty of storage underneath, enough headroom to sit comfortably on the lower and upper bunks. The entire structure is rock solid, and I think they look really nice too. These bunk beds solved exactly the problem we were facing with our cabin. Our cabin is relatively small, so every square foot matters. We wanted enough sleeping space for family and friends without making the space feel crowded, because we also want to have a dining table, some cozy chairs, and a kitchenette at the other end of the cabin. These bunk beds give us 4 comfortable sleeping spaces while still leaving room for what we want in the rest of the cabin. One of the biggest advantages of building your own furniture is you're not forced to compromise. You can get exactly what you want. Each bunk bed uses 11 premium grade SPF 2x6 boards, 2 premium grade KDHD, that's kiln dried heat treated 2x4 boards, 4 2x2 boards, those are the only standard wood boards used in this project, 29 slat boards, some structural screws, wood glue, and 3 grab handles. I specifically chose premium lumber because it tends to be straighter, stronger, and better looking than standard construction lumber. The total lumber cost came in just under $150 per bunk bed before tax. I was actually able to fit all the lumber for one bed inside my Tesla Model Y, which saved me a little bit of money on having to run a truck. I could have had everything delivered by Home Depot for about $85, but I wanted to handpick the boards so I could avoid any warped lumber. As far as tools are concerned, you don't need to spend a lot here either. You don't need everything that I used. I had a miter saw on hand, which was helpful, but you could do the same cuts with a circular saw. You'll need a jigsaw though, a drill, a Kreg pocket jig, a sander or sandpaper, a tape measure, a level, and I used a brad nailer, but that's just because I have one. It's definitely not necessary. Before buying the wood, I spent quite a bit of time designing everything in free design software called SketchUp. I had never used it before this project, but I don't think I could have built it without that software. I started by designing it around the memory foam mattresses that we had purchased for $150 each at Costco. The mattresses measure 38 inches wide by 75 inches long, and they're 8 inches high, so the entire bunk bed was built specifically around those dimensions. We learned from other DIY videos that you want to build this to fit securely into the bed frame without factoring in any wiggle room, so that's what we did, and I'm glad we followed that advice. My main design goal was strength. I wanted the weight to be transferred directly through solid wood instead of relying entirely on screws. That's why the horizontal support beams sit inside notches cut into the vertical supports. The weight isn't hanging from fasteners, it's resting on wood. That design decision is the biggest reason these bunk beds are so solid. The cutting stage took about half of this entire project's time. The other half was assembly, which was the fun part in my opinion. Fortunately, most of the cuts were simple and repetitive. I started by cutting the 5 horizontal 2x6 support boards to 78 inches each. That's 75 inches for the mattress, and 3 more inches to accommodate for the width of the 2x6s that would be on either side of the bed. Using a stop on the miter saw stand made it really easy to make these cuts identical and to make those cuts quickly. Next, I cut the 2 front vertical support 2x6s to 74.5 inches long, and each of these 2 boards needed 3 notches to be cut into them that would fit a 2x6. To do that, I notched out a 1.5 by 5.5 inch slot in 3 places for the 2 horizontal support beams and for that safety rail at the top. I knew I wanted 15 inches of clearance for guests to put luggage under the bottom bunk, so that made my first cut easy. The one closest to the floor just needed to be marked at 15 inches from the bottom, and then I cut a 1.5 inch deep and 5.5 inch high notch so the 2x6 could slip into that notch. I soon learned that I could just measure one part and then use a scrap 2x6 to trace out the rest of the notch. I cut those notches out with an oscillating multi-tool first, but found out later it was much easier to use a jigsaw. You could also use a chisel, but I don't trust myself with a chisel. I just haven't used that tool enough. I knew I wanted plenty of clearance for headroom for adults on the bottom bunk because since there isn't a lot of furniture in our small off-grid cabin, these could double as somewhat of a couch or a place to sit and play games by pulling a table over in between the 2 bunk beds. I chose to go with 3 feet of headroom between the 2 horizontal supports, so that's how I measured where the next ones would go. And the third notch was really simple because it was just going to be at the top. Now I moved on to the 2x6 vertical boards that would go against the wall. These were cut to 63.5 inches in height. After cutting these 2 vertical boards to length, the 2 notches were super easy to mark because they matched the front vertical supports, with the exception of that safety rail at the top. So I was able to easily trace out the same pattern and duplicate it there. Next, I cut the 4 2x2s that would go into the 2x6s to mount the bed slats upon. These had to be cut to 75 inches each, which is the length of the mattress. Then I cut the 4 shorter vertical support 2x6s that would bridge the gap between the back wall vertical support and the front vertical support. Later, we're going to put pocket holes into these. Next, I cut the bed slat boards because they came at 39 inches and I needed them to be 38 inches. 5 bed slat boards would also be used for the ladder, and they can be 38 inches too. So I cut all of these slat boards to 38 inches. With all the cutting complete, it was finally time for assembly. I started by laying the rear supports on the floor with the notches facing upward. After applying the wood glue, I positioned the horizontal support beams, drilled pilot holes, and secured everything using GRK 5/16 inch, 4-inch long structural wood screws. Then I repeated the process with the front supports. At this point, you can really see the strength of the design. Each support beam is sitting directly inside a notch. The screws help lock everything together, but the wood itself is carrying the load. This creates a structure that's incredibly solid. Once both sides were complete, I used pocket holes to install the connecting supports. I had never used a Kreg jig before this project, and honestly I expected it would be harder than it was. After just a few holes I got the hang of it, and I found it quite easy. Next, I installed the 2x2 supports that the mattress slats would sit on. I pre-drilled holes every 6 inches and secured them to the support beams with 2.5-inch construction screws. Then came one of the most satisfying parts of the entire build, installing the slats. I could have glued these down, but I decided it was finally time to justify owning a brad nailer, and then I secured the slats to the 2x2 with 2 brads at each end. The ladder came together quickly using slat boards for the rungs. I pre-drilled the holes and used 2.5-inch construction screws to secure them with 3 on each side. After testing it though, my wife pointed out something important. The steps were strong and they worked, but they weren't especially comfortable for adults. And she was right. Of course she was. I didn't want to add another step to the project, no pun intended. But this is her cabin and these beds are for her and her guests, so I added wider 2x4 supports behind the middle 3 steps. That simple change made climbing much more comfortable. One of the advantages of building your own furniture is that you can make improvements whenever you want. At this point, the bunk bed was fully functional. Now it was just time to make it look finished. So I sanded all of the edges, I removed the factory markings, and softened any areas that might cause splinters. I also installed 3 grab handles. 2 are positioned near the ladder, and 1 is mounted 2 feet from the ladder on the wall side of the upper bunk horizontal support to make getting down a lot easier. Those handles turned out to be one of my favorite additions. They're inexpensive, but they make the bunk bed much easier to use. I also added a small fan and a charging station to make guests more comfortable and to make this more convenient for them. Now for the important question, how does it actually feel? I'm 6'3" and I'm heavier than the guests who'll be using this. I'm thrilled to confirm that both bunks are incredibly solid and comfortable. The ladder is comfortable to climb, the grab handles help tremendously, there's plenty of room underneath for storage, and the headroom on the lower bunk feels great. Most importantly, these bunk beds allow us to host friends and family in a way we couldn't before, and that's really the whole reason I built them. Overall, I'm extremely happy with how these turned out. They're stronger than anything we looked at buying, they fit our space perfectly, and they cost a fraction of what pre-built bunk beds would have cost. If you'd like to build one for yourself, I've got the complete materials list and cut list and list of tools in the description. If you found this video to be helpful, please let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more content about living off-grid in Michigan, please subscribe. We'd love to have you join us. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.